I'm approaching this also from the perspective of somebody whose most recent experience was as a mayor and as a transit agency chair, although not in the core of either LA or the Bay Area. And I think first I would say this bill is tackling a very real problem, that we are building region-scale land use and climate and housing and equity plans or organized around transit, and then not building the housing around transit stations in order for that to occur. And to some extent, it's part of our larger challenge of we want to make sure if we do a project, that it has to be affordable, and it should have a solar roof, and it should have a child care center, and it should have an urban farm on the top of it, all of our goals. And while we're waiting for that moment, that land is being consumed for other projects. And we don't get another bite at the apple. So as we're waiting to build the perfect project, other things are consuming that land around the transit stations as we build them. So it is a very live challenge and an urgent one. And so I absolutely get the purpose and the approach of the bill here, and this larger view, because it is a regional and state priority that the local governments share to advance transit-oriented development and the significant benefits for mobility, for access to jobs, for social equity that these provide, that there is a key role for the state to engage in. I did want to, and I know you mentioned, Senator, that the analysis went through 1,000 things. To be fair, I think it's because the bill also goes through 1,000 things as well. So I wanted to go through a couple of these because I will say I'm approaching this from someone that's a different part of California, not radically different. I do represent 4 of the Bay Area's counties, but as I read the bill, it applies in my own district to just a few areas. Those that are served by the Capitol Corridor rail service, by the SMART light rail line in Sonoma and Marin, and potentially by the Vallejo Ferry, and that's it. So it isn't a broad scale coverage of my district. But at the same time, there's a reason for that, and that is that we have not found a way, and there is no plan, real or possible, for future frequent rail service in suburban, exurban, mostly urban places like Vallejo, Fairfield, Vacaville, Davis, my own city, maybe the closest, Woodland, others. We don't have a strategy for getting there. Our neighbors in the big urban areas will sort of talk about us like we are Sally Struthers charity campaign. Someday transit will arrive at these poor places that don't have it. We don't know how, but until then you have to comply with all the same exact standards that we have today in anticipation that it will arrive. When we don't have any strategy for, and it's not feasible to extend BART to most of my district as an example. The Capitol Corridor is the line that it is. It's not going to change. SMART is maybe the only example of a transit system that would meet these requirements that has been developed in my entire district in generations. So it makes it easier for me in some sense, but a lot of the laws that apply to these stations don't recognize that transit will look different. It has to in these communities, and I'll give an example. Many of them, mine was the first in the state to operate a publicly supported microtransit public rideshare system. That doesn't count because there's no fixed stop. That doesn't count as transit. And so we've got to look at these communities, and with all due respect, we're not pushing people to the suburbs. I mean, we have a housing crisis in all of California, including in suburban and rural California as well, where we're closing schools or potentially universities because we don't have enough people. So we have to, we need to be looking at these areas in ways that will accomplish that. The other key difference between the core Bay Area and the rest of at least Northern California is that in areas like mine, transit agencies are cities. They are cities and counties. There's not an independent agency that's the transit agency. And so in some respects, for the opponents of the bill, your fears are not that, they're not real. Like, there's just no chance that the mayors of Woodland, West Sacramento, Davis, and Winters are going to conspire and force any one of those 4 cities, through their role as the YOLO Bus Transit Agency, the other 3 are not going to force land use decisions onto any one of those cities. Cotati is not at any risk that Roanoke Park next door is going to conspire with the other cities in Sonoma County through SMART to impose these draconian land use issues that are being worried about. So in some sense, that structure is a cause for not being that worried about the impacts of the bill in that way. But also, at the same time, it's a recognition that just as transit agencies are cities and counties in these places, cities and counties are also the transit agencies. And so perhaps one of my biggest worries is that we are creating a perverse incentive for these places not to ever upgrade their transit systems. That if taking our YOLO bus line 42 that runs to the airport and taking it from 40 minutes to 30 minutes, that's great, everybody agrees. Taking it 30 minutes to 20 minutes, that's great, everybody agrees. Taking it to 16 minutes, everybody agrees. Taking it to 15 minutes, suddenly all of these laws get triggered. At 15 minutes, suddenly every one of these laws gets triggered. And who in their right mind as a city council member, maybe there's a couple of us, but really, who in their right mind that is going to get reelected is going to say, it's worth going from 16 minutes to 15 minutes and give up all of our local land use authority in this way? So this inflection point when the transit agency is also controlled, unlike BART or AC Transit or those that have elected agencies, it's controlled by the cities and the counties, and transit will only evolve and intensify over time if the whole community is rowing in that direction. No transit agency has ever emerged like Aphrodite out of the sea foam. It takes everyone contributing to that, and a mandate from the state can only take it so far. So that's sort of one sort of overarching challenge for me is wanting to make sure that we're not creating incentives, strong disincentives for local agencies in areas that don't have independent transit agencies to use their control of the transit agencies to keep them down in order to not trigger provisions like this. The second area that I want to understand, it picks up on what Senator Grayson said, is the tiering options that are in the bill, which I think is a thoughtful, well-considered approach for how to deal with this. But it misses something, and that is that transit is very, very much a network phenomenon. The density and the interconnectivity of the transit network is what makes it successful or not. So a Tier 3 transit service, something less than light rail, is a radically different animal in a place where it exists all by itself. For example, the SMART train in Sonoma, compared to a Tier 3 service that connects to a Tier 2 line and potentially through the Tier 2 line to a Tier 1 line. What your mobility envelope looks like, what your possibility frontier looks like, is radically different. If you can take every 40-minute bus or every 15-minute one, but that's Tier 3, and you can connect to AC Transit or to Muni and then get on BART, that is a radically different transit power than getting on in Davis onto Unitrans, onto the bus service. That's the only trip that you can take, right? And so just going the way that the tiers are operated, it treats Tier 3 as though it's just a slightly less version of Tier 2, which is a slightly less version of Tier 1. So there's no recognition of the network effect. And so to me, that presents a real challenge because when you have a Tier 3 major transit stop that is embedded in Tier 1 and Tier 2 networks, you should be driving to exactly these standards. But it isn't as clear to me that an isolated Tier 3 system in a suburban or a rural area all by itself should trigger something, but should it trigger the same exact thing as a Tier 3 line that connects to BART Muni or to LA Metro? So those are some of the larger questions I have about the bill, and you're welcome to respond either directly or in the close. Some specific things I wanted to raise, and I warned you I had a bunch of questions on this, but some specific factors I want to raise, and I know we will also, if the bill moves forward, we'll also hear it in local government, is and we're doing this a lot. And, we have a lot of shot clocks for local governments, and where there's a shot clock for the local government to do something, send it to HCD, and then there's a shot clock after HCD sends it back. There's no shot clock for HCD itself. And what's good for Peter is good for Paul here. And when you're trying at the local level to process these issues, or if you're a development project or transit agency, HCD can be a substantial time barrier. And so as we mandate local governments to do this in 15 minutes or this in 60 days, we should have some accountability for the state to do its part if time is really money and time is of the essence. And so I'm going to encourage you to think about a symmetry of the shot clocks. Second, curious about the language in the bill about the permanent operating easement for transit agencies being one of the triggers for objective standards. My worry here is that the way the language is constructed right now does not connect the permanent operating easements directly to the line or to the plan. It's simply any permanent operating easement, which creates the potential for developers to offer permanent operating easements for lines that do not exist and are not planned in order to qualify for the benefits of this bill. So the concept I agree with, but I want to be sure that that is tight and it's not, because it's essentially free to the developer to give, especially when there's not a line that it's not connecting to an existing or relatively soon planned line. And then I do have also concern about the remote properties issue that has been raised by several of the groups and others around the other properties that the transit agencies own that may or may not be directly associated with the lines as they are or as planned. I hope you will be able to address that. And then I guess the last thing I'll say, and it will apply not just to this bill, but to a lot of this work, and we've talked about this extensively, is we're very focused here on punishing the wicked and making sure the wicked don't do bad things, and that is an essential role for state government to do. And by the wicked, I think we almost always are referring to local governments. Who are either evil or too stupid to do the right thing. That's not my view of the world, that they are just as evil or stupid as state government or anyone else in society. There is a mix. And so I believe very much that we ought to have policies that punish the wicked, but that we also need to have policies that unleash the super talented, the ones that are getting the job done, and the ones that are better than average, the ones that are better than an analyst in HCD might come up with, that are really on that edge. And I'm looking at the city we're in right now. Do they get every single thing right? No. Do they take really hard risks to make progressive policies around housing production? Yes. Berkeley is another. My city's another. There's a lot of cities that are doing as well or better than we would in their shoes. And this is an example of one of those areas where we treat them all the same. And so where when Huntington Beach or Atherton or a city that's not developing the proper amount of transit-oriented development, when they commit a crime, the ankle bracelet goes on everyone, and so I think this is an area where we need to be thinking about developing a framework that applies either to the wicked or to the average, but where we are not preventing communities that are with us on all of our policy objectives and are doing the best that they can and are often succeeding from being able to accomplish that. So sorry for the...
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.